They shall not grow old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them. Lest we forget. Each year, as Anzac Day comes around, emotions and memories bubble up such as no other day in the year for all who shared in the experiences of those wars and actions of bygone years. On this Anzac Day, we remember the fallen Australian and New Zealand soldiers, the Anzacs, beginning with the mounted bushmen who rode against the Boers, through all the wars, including Vietnam. The Anzacs stormed the heights of Gallipoli and survived enormous slaughter. The light horse in the Sinai Desert fought against superior numbers and saved the Suez Canal in 1918. And the Anzac Corps broke the Hindenburg Line. They established a tradition of fighting quality, highly disciplined in action, emulated by their sons in the Second World War at Tobruk, Alamein, in Tunisia, Greece, Italy, and the islands of the Southwest Pacific. In New Guinea, they were the main force that defeated 100,000 Japanese. Anzacs fought under the United Nations flag in Korea, and when terrorists threatened Malaya and Borneo, they helped to garrison the countries and restore order. A third generation of Anzacs have gathered battle honors in Vietnam, our last conflict. They make a fine sight, don't they, Peter, those?
They do indeed, Tony.
Taxis. Remember, in the years we've been doing this, what's always intrigued me is sometimes some of the taxi drivers put their arm out of the cab.
I've noticed that. This is a signal, is it?
Yes, it's a signal. Sometimes, of course, some of the people they've carried in previous years happen to be in hospital, and this is their signal that they think of. As a matter of fact, one of the Manly drivers, I think, is on the sick list this year. Don Johnson, I think it is, one of their people, and I've no doubt one or two of the cabbies will be waving to him as they go past. There's one, there's another.
Just a moment to pay tribute, perhaps, to these men who do give up a day's livelihood and who do so much to carry these World War I and World War II diggers in this parade.
Yes, indeed. And I've no doubt they're very happy to do it. I just wonder how many taxis and see the large cab there. I wonder how many of these vehicles actually take part. There must be dozens and dozens, I think.
There have been dozens we've seen in previous years, and it looks as if we're going to have even more today, as this promises to be one of the biggest marches we've seen in many years.
20-odd thousand, I believe.
25,000 is now being estimated by the organisers. And they still come past the disabled, those who can no longer march in this one day of the year, the Anzac Day, and who are now being carried past in this cavalcade of taxis driven by the taxi drivers of Sydney.
And some, of course, can still remember vividly, no doubt, the events of the First World War in Palestine, 1917, where the Australian horsemen excelled. Others in the cars this morning, memory taking them back to the bit of fighting in Malaya in World War II, and the long, harrowing pullback to Singapore, the mud and slush in the jungles of New Guinea and the Burma Railway. The cost in terms of sheer physical exhaustion and loss of life and limb on the notorious Kokoda Trail. These men being carried now in front of you.
And still they come, and even whilst we've got men of World War I and World War II in those taxis, we've got to remember that there were casualties and disabled from Malaya, Korea and Vietnam, men who no longer can march but who are passing in front of you now, and I think they're marching as proud as they would if they were on foot with their comrades.
And they remember the Libyan desert, Benghazi, Tobruk, Alamein, and the inhospitable mountains, of course, of Crete. The war at sea, the war in the air. Others would have served later with the Australian forces in Korea, as Peter mentioned, the Malayan emergency, and more recently in Vietnam.
In fact, Tony, I have never seen, and I think you and I have been doing this now for nearly 8 years, I've never seen such a large number of cabs. Of course, it's a sad reminder that so many of these World War I and II soldiers are getting older and time is claiming them. But I have never, ever seen such a large number, and it's a pity that we can't see closer inside to see the faces of some of these old soldiers
indeed, yes,
who are driving past.
But the reason they continue to turn out, even though they can't go on foot, they're very much an integral part, aren't they, of Anzac Day?
Well, so far there must be at least, I'd say, 150 have passed us already.
Yes, yes. And these men in these cabs come to be counted with their former mates along the route from Martin Place to Hyde Park. Now, in those vans, if you look closer, you may be able to see that there are men in wheelchairs in those vans. And still they come, still coming out of Martin Place, line after line of cabs and vans.
Well, I've never seen such a number, and it's a tribute to the cab drivers of Sydney. I think they really do deserve congratulations on this day of all days for the service they're providing for this group of men who would do anything rather than not be here on this Anzac Day 1984.
There's another wave. Now we're getting some closer looks at the people inside these vehicles.
And this is the first of our bands which is now coming on. This is the RAAF Operational Command Band, not yet in action, but I think indicative of the way in which this day couldn't possibly survive unless they had the bands who provide such an enormous boost to them. And there they are, just standing as the mounted police escort prepare to go. And here they come, the mounted police escort, and it's always a fine sight to see them at the head of any march or parade, the mounted police escort. And this year they're led by Sergeant Ibe, and it's fitting that the mounted police are so prominent on this day because they themselves had a military beginning. I think it was way back in 1825 when Governor Brisbane recruited men from the infantry regiments serving the colony and formed the then New South Wales Mounted Police. And it's got some 50 years, I think, before the formation of the Canadian Mounties. But there, first off, is the National Executive of the Return Service League, Sir Colin Hines, just walked ahead of us. And we're back to the Mounted Police Escort. They are, of course, responsible for the care and maintenance of their own saddlery and the grooming of their own horses, and it's to their credit that everything is gleaming on this wonderful Anzac Day morning.
Gleaming it is indeed.
Of course, in the early days, these men had the job of keeping law and order in the colony with convicts and bushrangers, and later on in the goldfields of New South Wales. And immediately behind them, another mounted group, and in this case, this is the Northern River Lancers. And now, it's the 15th Light Horse Association. These men are determined to maintain the traditions and keep alive the concept of the light horse regiments who served Australia so well, certainly in World War I, on the Great March from Sinai, El Arish, Kantara, Ramana, Beersheba, Gaza, the charge at Beersheba, Gaza, and all the way up on the road to Damascus as they followed General Allenby. You can see their banner, the Northern River Lancers, the 15th Light Horse Association. Of course, these are not men of the original light horse, but men who are keeping that tradition alive.
Would they be armoured now?
No, unfortunately not. The light horse regiments are no longer in existence. But they were, of course, dismounted. They fought as dismounted infantry.
There are quite a number of them this year.
There is, and a very well turned out group, I might say. They add a colour to this parade, and it's a tradition, a link with the traditions of the past. And yet another group I think they're out of sequence again this year, early on in the march. This is the Parramatta Lancers. Again, these, I think, in the main are reserve soldiers, and once again they keep alive the traditions of the Parramatta Lancers. The Lancers themselves, you can see them with their lances and their guidons.
Are these also non-existent now?
No, the Parramatta Lancers, of course, is very much an active
very much
reserve unit. Possibly one of the finest in Australia. And there's the Royal Australian Air Force Operational Command Band. A very fine turned out band.
Now here's His Excellency, the Governor of New South Wales, Air Marshal Sir James Rowland, a distinguished World War II bomber pilot. Air Marshal Sir James Rowland was also a Pathfinder pilot. He was commissioned into the RAAF in 1943. In 1944 became a member of the RAAF Pathfinder Force, those elite pilots who led the Allied bomber force to targets in Germany.
And there's Sir Colin Hines, the State President of the New South Wales branch of the Returned Services League. We're immediately into the British troops of 1914-1918, the old Contemptibles, the men who set Kaiser Bill back on his heels. And this year, as in a place of honour, the New Zealand contingent. We haven't got too much information on the New Zealand contingent, but there they are, members of the New Zealand Returned Services Association.
They send a delegation here every year, don't they?
Every year they come, and of course there's a great link between them, between the RSL and the RSO.
Oh no, wait a minute, every second year. They come here, every other year we go there.
Of course. Now here we've got, once again, a very moving tribute to those who served in the Boer War of 1899 to 1902. The South African Memorial Horse with the boots reversed in the stirrups. And this year it's led by Constable Jeff Perry. And the South African veterans, it's 95 years ago to this year that the Boer War began on the 11th of October 1899 and continued until the signing of the peace in 1902. And that one single horse typifies the men who, the 16,000 men, 16,000 Australians engaged in that war. None of them regrettably with us now. The First World War AIS, Australian Imperial Force banner, and there's Major Burrows. These are men of World War I, Navy, First and First AIF, 1914 to 1918. They're led by Major G. Burrows. Major Burrows took part in the formation and training of the Australian 5th Division of the AIF in Egypt and went to France with that division. And he took part in all of the major battles. And he's marching today in a Land Rover.
The 1st Division signals.
Again, one must think of four very gallant gentlemen there representing a unit, and again two very gallant Australian diggers representing the Australian Camel Corps, men who formed part of the Desert Mounted Force and who played such a part in the campaigns in the Middle East in World War I. And there's Jim Ringrose again, who's marching after all these years.
Here's a name to conjure with, Gallipoli.
Gallipoli, of course, where Australia perhaps came of age in its armed forces, but I think that the traditions at Gallipoli had been with us a lot longer than that, and they've stayed with us ever since.
Of course, in amongst these, we've got all sorts of different people, Australian tunnelling companies. They had a period in Egypt and then went to France, and then the battalion was cut up into various tunnelling companies and an Australian electrical mechanised mining and boarding company. Tunnelling companies used for mining purposes under the front lines. Then we had the Corps of Signals.
Corps of Signals
Peter.
just passed by.
The squadron originally commanded by Major Charlie Marr. Served in Mesopotamia, Persia and Kurdistan with the British and Indian armies. Joined up with the Russians before the revolution. Now that's the St George and Sutherland Scottish Pipe Band.
Once again, our march is slightly out of order, but we've got the 2nd Division of the Australian Imperial Force, led this year by Major T. Day and I think Lieutenant Springhall. Men of the 2nd Division Headquarters, the 2nd Division Artillery, the Engineers, the Divisional Signals. And of course they fought at Hill 60, at Anzac, Pozières, Moquet Farm, Fleur, Lagincourt, Bullecourt, Menin Road, Broadside and Passchendaele.
And Sir Charles Kingsford Smith, I believe, was a one-time dispatch rider with the 2nd
He was
Division.
with the 2nd Division. Again, if we can reflect for just a moment, these very, very gallant soldiers driving in front of us represented so many years ago phalanxes of young men marching in their battalions, their companies, their brigades, their divisions. Perhaps a moment.
17th Battalion formed in Liverpool early in 1915. That produced one of the early VCs of World War I, Private Jackson.
The machine gun company, machine gun battalions. Of course, machine guns formed such an important part in World War I. Again, if we can think that what we're seeing here are those who carry the spirit of whole divisions, the 1st, the 2nd and the 3rd Division of the 1st Australian Imperial Force, who marched down these very same streets as 18, 19, 20-year-old men.
Were they known as Execook?
Yes, the 3rd Division, known as the Execook because of the shape of the colour patch that they wear. This is the 4th Division, which is now coming through. This was formed in Egypt after the evacuation of Gallipoli, and it contained many Gallipoli veterans. It was generally accepted as being one of the toughest of all the divisions. But again, Tony, we have just seen the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd and the 4th Division. 4 divisions, each of, say, 20 or 30,000 men are just going past us now.
How their numbers reduce over the years, Peter.
It's a sad fact which we've got to face.
Oh, yes.
Again, of that 4th Division, the 4th Division Artillery, the Engineers, Signals, and then afterwards we should have the banners for the 4th Brigade of the 14th, 15th and 16th Battalions, and of course the famous 13th Battalion of New South Wales, known as the Fighting 13th, and acclaimed as perhaps one of the most outstanding of all the Australian battalions in the First World War.
That battalion fought in every major battle of the AR, suffered the heaviest casualties and was awarded the most decorations of any unit. Now another band going on.
And the Naval Support Band, and again we've had the Air Force and now we've got the Navy, and again a very fine band. This is a regular band, and you can see them behind. That's quite obviously a regular unit there marching behind that band. The 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th Division have now passed us from World War I, and now we come to the Navy. The RAN, the Women's Royal Australian Naval Service, the Royal Navy and the RENS, the Women's Royal Emergency Naval Service.
Now that white ensign colour party escorted by a contingent of 100 men from HMAS Nuremberg.
It's interesting, don't you? They're apprentices, they're young sailors, apprentices from the training station at Quakers Hill, and a very fine contingent marching in front of the banner of the Naval Association of Australia. Each for all all for each. The New South Wales section led this year by Admiral Guy Griffiths, very prominent in the ex-service organisation and in the care and the concern of ex-servicemen, specifically naval ex-servicemen.
He joined the Royal Australian Naval College in 1937, graduated in 1940. Sunk in HMS Repulse off Malaya in 41, shipping company with HMS Prince of Wales, and in 1941 joined the Repulse as a midshipman.
The Naval Association of Australia is the general body covering all ex-naval personnel and naval men and women from miscellaneous ships and shore postings. Many of them, of course, can claim a ship, but they choose to march in this group. And here's the communications branch. The president, the march leader this year is Sid Galatli, I think.
Yes, and their group is known as the ears and eyes of the Navy. Ears, of course, the radio operators, the eyes, the signalmen. The banner bears the visual signals and telegraph emblems and the silhouettes of ships at sea. In every ship and shore establishment, there are communicators keeping watch on the lines of communication between ship and shore. And this association, formed in 1947, comprises officers and ratings in the communications branch who served during World War II.
And a very famous group now, and always a great favourite in this march, the RANS, the Women's Royal Australian Naval Service, and they're led by Mrs. Jess Doyle. You can see her there in the white hat. Enlisted as a telegraphist on Anzac Day in 1941, one of the first intakes of 14 RANS into the Australian Navy. And now we've got the Royal Marines.
A contingent of ex-Royal Marines marching behind their own band and representing a unique and distinguished body of men, soldiers at sea, shock troops, naval commandos, a glorious tradition of service dating back for hundreds of years.
Primarily, of course, British Royal Marines, since Australia doesn't have a Royal Marines unit.
But they still march very smartly, don't they?
And behind them, the Submariners Association, led today by Mr. A.A. Bakers. You can see their banner there, the Submariners Association with their dolphins, and has had more than 170 members located mainly in New South Wales and Queensland, and they represent both the Royal Australian Navy and the Royal Navy. Some, of course, are of World War I submarine vintage, whilst others are currently serving in submarines of the Royal Australian Navy today.
The Submariners.
The Association of
Wrens, Sydney branch, leading the branch, Miss Nora Devonish-Mears. Although Australian-born, Miss Devonish-Mears served as a first officer in the Women's Royal Naval Service during the Second World War. She was president of the Sydney branch for 25 years and then became its patron. Also one of the vice presidents of the Association of Wrens in London. Her Royal Highness the Princess Anne, the international patron of the Association of Wrens.
Now we've gone to Salvation Army Band. I think this is the Campsie Salvation Army Band, and again, a very fine band, and they've always provided such a wonderful musical support to the Anzac Day marches. And here we've got
here it is, HMS Perth and the Naval Ex-Prisoners of War Association. The World War II cruiser Perth, not the present-day destroyer of the same name. She started her war service on the first day of the Second World War, 3rd of September 1939, in the North Atlantic. Escorted Australian troop convoys to the Middle East, involved in many battles in the Mediterranean, bombarded enemy positions in Syria for the AIF. Returning to the Southern Hemisphere, Perth joined Abda Force early in February 1942, taking part in the Battle of the Java Seas.
The Campsie Salvation Army Band again, carrying their own colours. And luckily we can see at the back one of the most, I think, evocative symbols of the Salvation Army, the young ladies of the band with their symbols. Still stunningly attractive, despite the fact they've changed the shape of their bonnets.
They have too.
I perhaps see as something which I regret, but then I'm getting older. And the Scrap Iron Flotilla, I think, Tony?
Yes, the dear old lads, led by Lieutenant Commander R.C. Robinson, R.A.L. The association banner bears the names of the 5 famous destroyers of the flotilla: Stuart, Vampire, Voyager, Waterhen, and Vendetta. The Stuart, under the command of Captain Waller, led the 5 to the Mediterranean in 1940. Later, leader of the 10th Destroyer Flotilla, Greyhound, Griffin, Hotspur and Havoc. March 28, 1941 found her in company with major units of the Mediterranean Fleet and Metapan under Admiral Cunningham. In Portsmouth, she was later refitted in Sydney.
And there's the banner of the Vendetta Veterans Association of the 1917 Vendetta, destroyer of the famous V and W class, and then the Vendetta Mark II.
And now we're coming up to the N-class Destroyers Association, Napier, Nizer, Nestor, Norman and Nepal. They were taken over as N-class by the RAN in 1941, saw active service in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, Indian, Pacific Oceans, and played a prominent part in the Battle of Crete. The Ns also took part in the hazardous Malta convoy operation.
There's the quick match. There were only 2 destroyers of this class to be transferred from the Royal Navy to the Royal Australian Navy in 1942, and they comprised the 4th Destroyer Flotilla. And there's the Quiberon Association. She was launched in 1942, I think in January the 31st, in England.
A run to the first of 3 heavily armed, speedy tribal class destroyers to be built at Cockatoo Island during the war years. Commissioned in March 42. Under the command of Commander J.C. Morrow. Steamed over 350,000 miles. Placed in reserve in 57.
We should be seeing the HMAS Warramunga Veterans Association. I think they may have moved past us. And there's the HMAS, there's the Warramunga. You've got the banner of the Warramunga in front of you now, and they're led by Commodore J.L. Red Merson. The Warramunga supported landings at the Admiralty Islands in the Atape-Wewak areas, and later in 1945 at Corregidor and Tarakan, supporting the 9th Division in their landing there.
And here's the Canberra.
HMAS Canberra contingents led by Jim Brady, president of the Canberra Shropshire Association. HMAS Canberra, a Kent-class heavy cruiser, was commissioned in 1928. She operated as the flagship of the Australian squadron on 4 occasions. She served in the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean.
Now, coming up the Shropshire.
Shropshire, a London class heavy cruiser, presented to the Australian government to replace HMAS Canberra, which was lost in the Battle of Savo Island on the 9th of August 1942.
The Gascoyne and Warrego, led by Bob Wright of the Gascoyne, president of the Gascoyne Association.
And there's the Gascoyne. She was the first frigate commissioned into the RAN, and she was commissioned at Mort's Dock in 1943, and along with a number of other Australian ships, she served as part of the American Pacific Fleet. It's astonishing, the speed with which this march is going beneath us today. It is quite astonishing. They're being doubled up.
And here's the Sydney, led by the National President and Secretary Douglas A. Price. Veterans marching today. Navy personnel, retired and serving, who saw service in any of the 3 Sydney. The First War Sydney, the Second War Sydney, and the aircraft carrier, also the Sydney. HMAS Sydney. Men who fought in the Sydney Emden action off Cocos Island on the 9th of November 1914. Veterans who fought in the Second Sydney in the 88 actions against the enemy in the Mediterranean. And veterans who served in the 3rd Sydney and saw battle action in Korea and Vietnam. And now the new and 4th Sydney, including the commanding officer, Commander Paul Cable.
That's the Parramatta City Brass Band, and behind them you can see the banner of the anti-submarine branch.
Led by Captain H.V. Newcomb, RN retired, and CPO Ike Cowie, marching with their banner of a rope called about a harpoon, superimposed, there it is, on the flash of lightning, gold on blue. The ASDIC boys often referred to as ping merchants by the nature of their specialised skills, and these lads were scattered all over the place in ships, mostly destroyers, throughout the Navy. Most of them served with the RN. They formed their own association and prefer to march together on Anzac Day.
And the armed merchant cruisers coming behind, the Manura, the Canimbla and Westralia. But there's the Armed and Merchant Cruise and Landing Ships Association. And there's the Westralia. In the early years of the war, she patrolled the eastern waters and helped evacuate women and children from Nauru and the Ocean Island. And it was then converted to a landing ship infantry and won the distinction of being the first Australian ship of class actively engaged in amphibious operations. Corvettes now. HMAS Ballarat.
There were more corvettes than ships of any other class, by the way, serving in the Royal Australian Navy. 56 of them, built in Australian shipyards, considered especially effective in anti-submarine work, minesweeping and escort duties. Now we've got the Ipswich coming on, led by George Crocker, president of the association. Served in the Mediterranean, the Pacific and Indian Ocean, president in Tokyo Bay for the Japanese surrender. One of the famous old boys is Sir Lawrence Street, Chief Justice and Lieutenant Governor of New South Wales. Now, note those battle honours there. The Bundaberg, Coral Sea, Milne Bay, Madang, Admiralty Islands, the Sepik. They must have seen a lot of action around Papua New Guinea.
Bundaberg operated with the AIF in World War II, and she played her part in capturing Madang in April of 1944, and then she followed the assaults on Sek Island and Alexis Haven. She also actually went up the Sepik River and was on constant patrol off Hollandia, Moritor, Timor and Borneo. And she finally accepted the Japanese surrender at Kuching. And there's Katoomba.
And the Katoomba coming past us now.
She's led today by Commander Ken Clements, and the Katoomba escorted original convoys at Milne Bay at the beginning of World War II, and she carried out anti-submarine patrols in enemy waters in the China Straits off Buna and Gona. And now the HMAS Brisbane.
Now the Brisbane March Leader, Rear Admiral R.G. Loosely, RN retired. There have been 2 Australian warships named Brisbane. The first, a 5,400-ton cruiser built in Sydney between 1913 and 16, saw service in the Great War, paid off in 35.
I think we just saw Admiral Loosely then, who's leading today.
It's leading today.
There's a banner there for the HMAS Hobart.
34 commissioned for the Royal Navy as HMS Apollo. 39 transferred during the Munich crisis to the RAN, being commissioned as HMAS Hobart at Devonport in England. 1940 employed mainly on convoy duties in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Escorted the first contingent of AIF to the Middle East. That was the Hobart, and it's led by Captain F.N. Cook, RAN.
And of course there is the second guided missile destroyer Hobart, the DDG-39, launched at Bay City in 1964 and commissioned at Boston in 65. Hobart had 3 periods of service in Vietnam waters, where she was known as the Grey Ghost, which is the main motif on the banner carried by these Vietnam veterans. And there's the ex-gunners, ex-naval gunners.
Thames gunners from defensively equipped merchant ships. Naval ratings drafted to merchant ships usually had 3 or 4 6-inch guns, provided anti-aircraft, anti-submarine protection for ships of the merchant navy, from the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth down to the oldest ocean-going.
The HMAS Murchison Association, led today by ex-petty officer and president of the Murchison Association, Norm Gondorf, who served in both the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy. There's the Murchison and the first hospital ships, I think led this year by Walter Riley. Hospital ships, of course, performed a marvellous service in every zone of combat.
They did indeed, yes.
Their duties extended past the cessation of hostilities in bringing back the prisoners of war back to their home bases. There's a new one this year, Tony, the Fleet Air Arm.
Yes, the RAN's first carrier, Sydney, operated with great distinction in Korea, creating a light fleet carrier record of 150 attack missions flown on a 2-day operational period. Now the Merchant Navy.
It's led today by Captain Alan Pearson, the Federal Master of the Company of Master Mariners. And there's Captain Alan Pearson.
Merchant seamen from master to deck boy who man the troop ships, hospital ships, fleet auxiliaries, tankers, cargo ships, and supplied all of the armed forces. Wherever there was an amphibious operation, the Merchant Navy was there with the troops and equipment to support and to sustain the lads.
It might be just a moment to say, to pass on a greeting from those who are marching today and from those who are watching, to those who are in hospital and who can't be with us today, but who are watching from nursing homes and hospitals throughout New South Wales.
Too.
And at home, of course.
And a cheerio too to all the nurses and sisters at the War Veterans Homes today.
It's been one of the quickest marches I've ever seen get off the mark.
Indeed, it's gone like a flash.
It might be a moment too to pass on a thank you to the Boy Scouts, the Scout Association, without which I think this parade wouldn't be what it is today. If you notice, the Boy Scouts are there on almost every occasion, carrying banners and placards. And there's the Royal Australian Naval Reserve, a very smart, the turned out contingent of the Royal Australian Naval Reserve. And it is, in fact, the band of the Naval Reserve.
Very fine body of men, these, in the Royal Australian Naval Reserve.
And there's Captain White Brown, who's leading the contingent this year. It's very good to see this Royal Australian Naval Reserve. I think in peacetime, Captain White Brown is a 747 pilot. Nonetheless, he's at the head of a very fine and very well turned out group of Naval Reserve officers and men. One of the intriguing parts of this march is that nobody is where they're supposed to be. At least haven't been so far.
Very true, Peter.
Oh, a very fine band here, the police military band. And
traditionally, they lead the contingent of over 200 ex-servicemen from the New South Wales Police Force, led today by Deputy Commander W.B. Ross. Now there they are, police band.
And immediately behind them, the New South Wales Police Force contingent, leading over 200 ex-servicemen of the New South Wales Police Force. Ex-servicemen and women who are currently serving in the police force and who choose to march in their own uniforms rather than with their own individual units. They served in World War II with the RAAF, with the United Nations Force in Cyprus, the Asian campaigns, Malaysia, Korea and Vietnam. Plainclothes detectives, again, who choose to march as in their own profession, rather than with the units with whom they earned the medal ribbons, which you see so proudly displayed on their chest today.
How often can you see so many detectives all at the one time?
And of course, the traffic parking police. This was formed from a small corps of 20 incapacitated ex-servicemen originally, and the gesture employed sufficient employment. But there we have the banner of the great 2nd Australian Imperial Force. And as I say, we saw the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th and the 5th Divisions march past. And now we see the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, this year led by Major General Kenneth William Ether, with 2 ADCs walking alongside his son, Captain Ewan Ether, a Vietnam veteran, and Captain Bob Bennett.
I believe this is their 45th anniversary, the 2nd AI.
It is indeed. 45th anniversary of their march. And he's accompanied, General Ether is accompanied by Mr. Norman Rose, the President of the 2nd AIF Council. This, of course, is the beginning of the great mass of World War II servicemen who left to fight in the battles of World War II in Europe and in the Pacific Islands, in Southeast Asia. There's Mr. Norman Rose, President of the 2nd AIF Council. And immediately behind them, the band of the Royal New South Wales Lancers. There's
Now that's the Armoured Corps, Royal Australian Armoured Corps Association, formed in the Middle East in April 40 by the late General Sir Thomas Blamey. Australia raised 3 armoured divisions in World War II, comprising 10 armoured regiments, 3 armoured car regiments, independent armoured squadrons, and a brigade of infantry support tanks. They fought in Libya, Greece, Crete, and Syria.
And they're led today as Army and Corps troops of the 2nd AIF, operational by Lieutenant General Sir Mervyn Brogan, who was formerly Chief of the General Staff. And there's General Brogan marching in front of the banner of the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, 1939-1945.
Now coming up, Peter, the 1st Armoured Regiment.
This is the 1st Armoured Regiment. They're led today by Major Norman Bent.
He looks almost like Monty, doesn't he?
This regiment fought in New Guinea and Dutch Borneo and used Matilda tanks. It's the successor to the New South Wales Lancers of the South African War and the 1st Light Horse Regiment of the 1st AIF and the present serving regiment of the 115 Royal New South Wales Lancers of Parramatta. It's the oldest cavalry regiment in Australia with a continuous history, and it has 21 battle honours in 3 wars.
Now the 2nd, 4th Australian Armoured Regiment. They used to also, I think, Matildas, didn't they?
Yes, Tony, they were heavily engaged in action in New Guinea and Bougainville, and in 1944 was sent to Madang in New Guinea, and from there its B Squadron under Major Ken Arnott went to Bougainville. And as the 2nd 6 Australian Armoured Regiment, led today by Major F. Tye, and their banner green and red, the only Australian Armoured Regiment to use American tanks in action.
And I think it was also the 1st Australian Armoured Unit to go into action in New Guinea in 42.
Indeed, I think there we have Major F. Tye under their banner of green and gold.
The 2nd 9th Field Regiment, formed in 1940, I think.
Indeed, I think today it's led by Colonel D.H. Irvine, if we can see him for a moment. The artillery, of course, always follows the Armoured Corps, and it's led today by Colonel D.H. Irvine, who you see there now.
That unit formed in 1940, south of the Middle East in 1941, saw service in Egypt and Palestine, and fought in the Battle of Syria.
And the second 1st, or I'm not too sure whether the 2nd 1st or 2nd 11. The 2nd 11, of course, was heavy artillery, and these units manned positions all around the coast. As the 1st of the 1st and 2nd Australian Mountain Battery, its commanding officer was
P.O. Hare, wasn't it?
Yes, who was awarded an OBE. It was formed in 1942 as a pack horse artillery unit for service in the mountains. Again, unfortunately, Tony, they're not following their order of march, but we'll pick them up as best we can from their banners.
Yes.
The pack artillery, by the way, served in Boona, Gona and Wau to Salamaua.
Now, the 2nd 1st Light Anti-Aircraft Battery. They're medium artillery, aren't they, Peter? Regiments saw prolonged
These
service.
regiments saw prolonged service in practically every theatre of war.
Yeah.
The infantry, not always generous with their claims, claim facetiously that the Anzac Ironmongery did more damage coming up than it did going down. But of course, this was the infantry. They performed magnificently in World War II. We had the 2nd 1st and the 2nd 4th and the 2nd 17th Light Anti-Aircraft
Now,
Battery,
they were
which is
airborne,
airborne.
weren't they?
Yes, possibly one of the first airborne units in the Australian Imperial Force, having its guns and personnel moved by planes on a number of occasions in Papua New Guinea.
Now, that unit, by the way, was the only Australian independent airborne light anti-aircraft battery. As such, deployed, as Peter said, operationally in New Guinea.
We should be seeing the composite regiment. We've missed the heavy anti-aircraft batteries, the 2nd and the 14th, which is a pity because they were nicknamed the Burn Boys. The composite regiments, the 52nd, 53rd, 54th, 55th, 19th and 32nd. And there you see the 19th just passing you. And now we've got the 2nd, 17th Light Anti-Aircraft Battery. 2nd, 17th was the 1st Airborne Unit and was used by air in the Islands campaign. Now we're getting the heavy batteries. Another
Now, light anti-aircraft.
555 light anti-aircraft. These were known at the beginning of the war as anti-tank gunners because they bore the brunt of many of the tank attacks. They used 2-pounders and later on 6-pounders. They were, of course, anti-aircraft, light, medium and heavy gunners, and they fought in all sectors with Oerlikons, Brownings and Bofors.
And anything they could lay their hands to.
Anything they could lay their hands on.
32nd Australian heavy anti-aircraft battery.
This march is becoming a little bit of a lottery as to know who's coming next
is
or
indeed.
wherever they are.
Now, the searchlight battery is coming along.
Well, searchlight batches, we've 73rd. We should have the 67th and the 73rd, but it's the association coming first. And now we have the 67th. Now, this, of course, was formed in Victoria in 42, which possibly accounts for the relatively small number marching today, but nonetheless, they're marching well. And the 73rd, which was the mobile searchlight unit, served in Port Moresby, New Guinea, and led today by Major S. Woodham. Now we're back again to the composites, the composite regiments, which composed of heavy, light. It's the 139, 154, 76 anti-aircraft batteries, and the workshops and the signal sections, and of course Dutch New Guinea on their banner. That's the leader of the composite units. There's another the 53rd Composite Anti-Aircraft Regiment, Buna, New Guinea, Morotai, with a banner very well held by regular troops. 54th Composite Anti-Aircraft Regiment of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, marching before you now. And immediately behind the gunners, of course, the engineers. Engineers are perhaps the most useful, if I probably get thousands of letters for saying that, but there are never enough engineers. They are in every sector of the battlefield. The engineers still passing behind us. By 1945, there were 28,000 of them. That's some 9 or 10% of the entire army. Now, the first field squadron of the Royal Australian Engineers of the Australian Imperial Force. We've just stopped for a moment, as always happens on these marches, but they're now marching off once again. It's quite wonderful because even the members of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force are getting on in years, with the average age now between, I think, about 69 years of age. And now we're getting the medium and anti-aircraft regiments in the gunners, so it's in the engineers. In the middle of the engineers.
And they're followed by the 14th Australian Field Company, also engineers.
And the 18th Australian Field Company, the Royal Australian Engineers behind.
Now, what have we got? Palestine, Australian Railway Construction Company. Very distinctive banner with the blue diamond on a red background.
And immediately behind are the pioneer companies coming up. The 2nd first, the 2nd second, and Second 11 mechanical equipment companies, specialist units which work under the wing of the Royal Australian Engineers. Formed in 1942, they've got an expertise in driving and maintaining heavy equipment, bulldozers and tractors. And the men were recruited from the Water Board and the Department of Main Roads, and farmers who could handle heavy equipment. They were all called in together to form the Second First, Second Second and the Second 11th Mechanical Equipment Company.
And I believe if anything went missing in the way of equipment, these people had got it.
And the 23rd Field Company of the Royal Australian Engineers.
59th Australian Corps Field Park Company. This is the Sydney Congress Band.
It's the Sydney Congress Hall Band, yes. A very smart band. And behind the 27th Field Company, Royal Australian Engineers of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force.
We haven't had any signals boys come up yet, have we?
We had one group suddenly marching in the middle, I think, of the engineers. I think there's a famous face there, which many would recognise as he's marching along.
Yes.
Especially if you're into gardening.
Yes, indeed, Alan. Alan Seal.
Still with the engineers, the 9th Field Company.
Now that Bulldog Road in the New Guinea Highlands, very famous road, worked under enormous difficulty. The whole unit finally had to be disbanded because of the health of its members.
And Fortress Company is just marching in front of your screen now. And there's a good smart junior band there, De La Salle Reevesby Band. I think they've always marched in the Anzac Day Parade and they're doing extremely well. Deserve a special mention. Royal Australian Survey. And now we're back to perhaps where we should be with the Signal Corps. This is the 1st and 2nd Corps signals. Motto is surely and swiftly. And there's the signals, 2nd Australian Corps.
These people are an integral part of all beach landing operations. Throughout the war, they were guiding ships in and out of beachhead landings, many times, of course, under fire. The signals, that's the 2nd Australian Corps.
There's the lines of communication signals, and you can see how important they were, providing the long-range signals. You can see they were based in Australia as far forward as possible, providing the all-important strategic signals.
Now, they were responsible for increasing the trunk line facilities, Peter, I believe, from Alice Springs to Darwin.
Indeed. In fact,
the 40s.
They set up some 13,000 poles to carry more than 5,500 miles of wire. As the dispatch riders coming down in double groups now, which is a little bit difficult to handle. We've now got the dispatch riders who carried signals, of course, on their motorbikes in every action. And
the carrier pigeon lands. So with Americans and Australian forces in the Southwest Pacific. Throughout the war, they carried over 4 million groups of messages, and they received 2 George medals.
These special wireless
New Guinea
group.
Volunteer Rifles. The residents of New Guinea, the Volunteer Rifles, first troops actively engaged in opposing the Japanese in New Guinea at Rabaul and Salamaua in 1942. Now here's another band.
I think this is the band of the Pitt Waterhouse School. And again, a well-turned-out band, making a very fine effort today. And it's good to see these younger units providing the military music for the Anzac Day March 1984. The Intelligence Corps, led this year by Brigadier Keith Stringfellow, is now marching into view at the head of the Australian Intelligence Corps. The association's patron, Sir Eric Willis, should also, I think, be somewhere there in the front ranks. I caught a glimpse a moment ago. The Central Bureau of Intelligence perhaps deserves a special mention because their work has never been really appreciated. Of course, intelligence provides the early warning, and so much of what they did is never to be revealed. And there's
their motto, of course, forewarned is forearmed.
Of course. And the Australian Paratroop Battalion and the association. A famous red beret, of course, has to be earned by making at least 8 parachute jumps. Then all eligible paratroopers wear the beret.
Unit formed in 1942 by volunteers, came mostly from other units having seen service in the Middle East and New Guinea. 10 military crosses held by members of that association.
And immediately behind the Australian Green Berets, the Australian Commando Squadrons, led this year by their president, Captain W.A. Littler. Word Commando, of course, borrowed from the Boers, and these men wore the small double diamond colour patch. Formed in 1941 as independent companies to fight behind enemy lines, trained as shock troops, specialising in the use of automatic weapons, explosives and booby traps. Each man cross-trained and expected to perform feats of physical endurance much more demanding than the normal.
These lads were specialists in unarmed combat too, weren't they?
Yes, indeed, and they saw action in the whole of the Southwest Pacific area, and they performed many unpublicised actions in the Solomon Islands, Timor, New Guinea, Bougainville, Rabaul, Tarakan and Borneo. And the second first. Bush Commandos, they have eyes and ears of the army.
Stannard, I believe, was
yes,
in charge of these. Came from Queensland or North Queensland, and no one really knew what these chaps were doing. They were always taking courses somewhere.
It's the second first, the second second, the second third, second fourth, second sixth, and the first independent company. As of course, the very famous banner, the Z, of the Z Special Unit. And it's only over the past 2 or 3 years that people are beginning to realise what this unit did and its achievements. It comprised special wartime members of the Army, Navy and Air Force and Allied Forces, Z Force and M Force. They were Coast Watchers, and they're led today. It's difficult to see who's leading them at the moment, but they were responsible for 264 missions and were awarded over 190 decorations. The full story of Zed's Special Force, I think, will never ever be told. Much is coming out now. Secrecy shrouded most of its clandestine activities of this incredible Australian unit. And in fact, we're now getting more evidence that they did in fact pull off some quite magnificent coups which the Japanese were at pains to keep very, very quiet about. One of the most secret wartime groups, Special Z Force, was formed to engage in organising guerrilla forces behind the lines, sabotage, collecting enemy information. Hand-picked volunteers.
Now this is the St Mary's District Pipe Band coming along now in your viewing sector.
This is the 2nd AIF Army and Corps Troops of Services, led, it's
Lieutenant Colonel Andy Richmond and Colonel Ron McCann is also there somewhere. Ammunition Company.
Of course, the Army Service Corps, the Operational Army, there's the Supplies and Transport Directorate within the Quartermaster's branch. And apart from its main supply and transport duties, the Corps was also a combatant corps, trained as infantry in tactics and combat, so that its members understood the needs of the army and were able to fight as infantry soldiers if necessary. And in fact, they did in Tobruk and in Malaya, where they were the first to fire on the Japanese. And you can see the specialised banners. They're the 2nd 101 Transport Company. The 2nd 105 and the 2nd 106, Australian General Transport. 2nd 110, 110th, Australian General Transport Companies. Australian Army Service Corps 14 Company, 251 Supply and 252 Transport. And now, of course, the Ducks.
There it is, famous banner. Booker, Morotai, Borneo, wherever the action was, there they were. Second 105th, second 106th.
And another good band, the Drum Corps of the Air Training Corps. We're still getting the Australian General Transport Companies of the Australian Army Service Corps, the 132nd Australian General Transport Company, Bougainville, New Britain, Moresby, Lae, Milne Bay, Wee-Way.
Now, who was the group known as the Biscuit Bombers?
The Biscuit.
They used to drop supplies and all this sort of thing.
Yes, indeed.
Air
a very
they were
famous
some of
unit.
these
The Air
things,
Maintenance.
surely.
It was the newest branch of the then newest branch of the Service Corps, dating from the early New Guinea campaign, when it became apparent that conventional supply methods were unsuitable for the terrain. So the handling of all supplies and the loading of the aircraft and the actual dropping of the loads became the responsibility of the Air Maintenance companies.
But it wasn't only tins of biscuits, was it? It was
Oh no,
jeeps
they
and
provided
generators, all
jeeps,
sorts of
generators for the
Yeah.
10,000 or so troops deployed in New Guinea. And in fact, there I think is one of their banners. And there's the Pack Horse banner. First and third pack transport companies. Because of the terrain, of course, they used their mules, and they were invaluable. Now, the 2nd, 3rd Australian Casualty Clearing Station, I might say I received a very pleasant letter that reminded me that the casualty clearing stations were not the most forward medical unit. Of course, it was the casualty clearing post, and we're most grateful for that information. But nonetheless, these units were a very forward organisation, as you can see there. The 2nd, 3rd Australian Casualty Clearing Station, with their banner with their names going back to World War I.
And the Medical Corps provided staff to treat and transport the wounded all the way from the front line to a convalescent home if need be. Now, right at the forward position were the advanced dressing stations, the ADS. And they passed the men back to CCS, the Casualty Clearing Station. We've just seen their banner. And in more serious cases, they were seen by field ambulance units and, if necessary, taken to an Australian General Hospital. Could be a field